Chapter 11. The improbability-proof control cabin of the Heart of Gold looked like a perfectly conventional spaceship, except that it was perfectly clean because it was so new. Some of the control seats hadn't had the plastic wrapping taken off yet. The cabin was mostly white, oblong, and about the size of a smallish restaurant. In fact, it wasn't perfectly oblong. The two long walls were raked around in a slight parallel curve, and all the angles and corners of the cabin were contoured in excitingly chunky shapes. The truth of the matter is that it would have been a great deal simpler and more practical to build the cabin as an ordinary three-dimensional oblong room, but then the designers would have got miserable. As it was, the cabin looked excitingly purposeful, with large video screens arranged over the control and guidance system panels on the concave wall and long banks of computers set into the convex wall. In one corner, a robot set humped its gleaming brushed steel head hanging loosely between its gleaming brush steel. In one corner, a robot set humped its gleaming brushed steel head hanging loosely between its gleaming brushed steel knees. It too was fairly new, but though it was beautifully constructed and polished, it somehow looked as if the various parts of its more or less humanoid body didn't quite fit properly. In fact, they fitted perfectly well, but something in its bearing suggested that they might have fitted better. Zaphod Beeblebrox paced nervously up and down the cabin, brushing his hands over pieces of gleaming equipment and giggling with excitement. Trillian sat hunched over a clump of instruments, reading off figures. Her voice was carried around the tenomy system of the whole ship. 5-1 against and falling, she said. 4-1 against and falling. 3-1, 2, 1. Probability factor of 1-1. We have normality. I repeat, we have normality. She turned her microphone off, then turned it back on, with a slight smile, and continued. Anything you still can't cope with is, therefore, your own problem. Please relax. You will be sent for soon. Zaphon burst out in annoyance. Who are they, Trillian? Trillian spun her seat around to face him and shrugged. Just a couple of guys we seem to have picked up in open space, she said. Section ZZ, plural Z, Alpha. Yeah, well, that's a very sweet thought, Trillian, complained Zaphod, but do you really think it's wise under these circumstances? I mean, here we are on the run and everything. We must have the police of half the galaxy after us by now, and we stopped to pick up hitchhikers. Okay, so 10 out of 10 for style, but minus several million for good thinking, yeah? He tapped irritably at a control panel. Trillian quietly moved his hand before he tapped anything important. Whenever Zaphod's qualities of mind might include dash, bravado, conceit, he was mechanically inept and could easily blow the ship up with an extravagant gesture. Trillian had come to suspect that the main reason he had such a wild and successful life was that he never really understood the significance of anything he did. Zaphod, she said patiently. They were floating unprotected in open space. You wouldn't want them to have died, would you? Well, no. Not as much, but not as much. Not die as such, but... Trillian cocked her head on one side. Well, maybe someone else might have picked them up later. A second later and they would have been dead. Yeah, so if you'd taken the trouble to think about the problem a bit longer, it would have gone away. You'd have been happy to let them die? Well, not happy as such, but... Anyway, said Trillian, turning back to the controls. I didn't pick them up. What do you mean? Who picked them up then? The ship did. Huh? The ship did, all by itself. Huh? While we were in an improbability drive. But that's incredible. No, Zaphod, that's just very, very improbable. Yeah. Look, Zaphod. I'm gonna cry. She said, patting his arm. Don't worry about the aliens. They're just a couple of guys, I expect. I'll send the robot down to get them and bring them up here. Hey, Marvin! In the corner, the robot's head swung up sharply, but then wobbled about imperceptibly. It pulled itself up to its feet as if it was about 5 pounds heavier than it actually was, and made what an outside observer would have thought was a heroic effort to cross the room. It stepped in front of Trillian and seemed to stare through the left shoulder. "I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed," it said. Its voice was low and hopeless. "Oh, God," muttered Zaphod, and slumped into a seat. "Well," said Trillian in a bright, compassionate tone, "here's something to occupy and keep your mind off things." "It won't work," droned Marvin. "I have an exceptionally large mind." "Marvin," warned Trillian. "All right," said Marvin. "What do you want me to do?" "Go down to number 2 entry, bay, and bring 2 aliens up here under surveillance." With a microsecond pause and a finely calculated micro-modulation of pitch and timbre, nothing you could actually take offense at, Marvin managed to convey his utter contempt and horror of all things human. "Just that," he said. "Yes," said Trillian firmly. "I won't enjoy it," said Marvin. Zaphod leaped out of the seat. "She's not asking you to enjoy it," he shouted. "You do it, will you?" "All right," said Marvin, like the tolling of a great cracked bell. "I'll do it." "Good," stamped Zaphod. "Great, thank you." Marvin turned and lifted his flat-topped triangular red eyes up toward him. "I'm not getting you down at all, am I?" he said, pathetically. No, Marvin, lifted Trillian. "That's just fine, really. I wouldn't like to think I was getting you down." "No, don't worry about that," the Lil continued. You just act as comes naturally and everything will be just fine." "You sure you don't mind?" probed Marvin. No, Marvin, lilted Trillian. "That's just fine, really. Just part of life." Marvin flashed her an electronic look. "Life," said Marvin. "Don't talk to me about life." He turned hopelessly on his heel and lugged himself out of the cabin with a satisfied hum, and it clicked the door closed behind him. "I don't think I can stand that robot much longer," Zaphod growled. "Oh," Zaphod growled Trillian. "Ooh. So Trillian doesn't like him." I'm gonna scan through that real quick again. The Encyclopedia Galactica defines a robot as a mechanical apparatus designed to do the work of a man. The marketing division of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation defines a robot as your plastic pal who's fun to be with. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy defines the marketing division of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation as a bunch of mindless jerks who'll be the first against the wall when the revolution comes, with a footnote to the effect that the editors would welcome applications from anyone interested in taking over the part of robotics correspondent. Curiously enough, an edition of the Encyclopedia Galactica that had the good fortune to fall through a time warp from 1,000 years in the future defined the marketing division of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation as a bunch of mindless jerks who were the first against the wall when the revolution came. The pink cubicle had winked out of existence. The monkeys had sunk away to a better dimension. Man, it almost feels like random shit. Yeah. No, it's not random. Yeah. It's just explaining the robot, actually. Yeah. Okay. I thought it was like some government thing I was reading about for some reason. Oh, it's because it is. Alright. Ford and Arthur found themselves in the embarkation area of the ship. It was rather smart. I think the ship's brand new, said Ford. How can you tell? Asked Arthur. Have you got some exotic device for measuring the age of metal? No. I just found this sales brochure lying on the floor. It's a lot of the universe can be your stuff. Ah, look, I was right. Ford jabbed at one of the pages and showed it to Arthur. It says, sensational new breakthrough in improbability physics. As soon as the ship's drive reaches infinite improbability, it passes through every point in the universe. Be the envy of every other major governments. Be the envy of other major governments. Wow, this is big league stuff. Ford hunted excitedly through the technical specs of the ship, occasionally gasping with astonishment at what he had missed during the years of his exile. This is like kind of scary. Arthur listened for a short while, but being unable to understand the vast majority of what Ford was saying, he began to let his mind wander, trailing his fingers along the edge of an incomprehensible computer bank. He reached out and pressed an invitingly large red button on a nearby panel. The panel lit up with the words, "Please do not press this button again." He shook himself. "Listen," said Ford, who was still engrossed in the sales brochure. "They make a big thing out of the ship's cybernetics, a new generation of Sirius Cybernetics Corporation robots and computers with the new GPP feature." "GPP feature?" said Arthur. "What's that?" "Oh, it says genuine people personalities." "Oh," said Arthur. "Sounds ghastly." A voice behind them said, "It is." The voice was low and hopeless and accompanied by a slight clanking sound. They spun around and saw an abject steel man standing hunched in the doorway. "What?" they said. "Ghastly," continued Marvin. "It all is. Absolutely ghastly. Just don't even talk about it. Look at this door," he said, stepping through it. The irony circuits cut in to his voice modulator as he mimicked the style of the sales brochure. "All the doors in this spaceship have a cheerful and sunny disposition. It is their pleasure to open for you, and their satisfaction is to close again with the knowledge of a job well done." As the door closed behind them, it became apparent that it did indeed have a satisfied sigh-like quality to it. It said. Marvin regarded it with cold loathing while his logic circuits chattered with disgust and tinkered with the concept of directing physical violence against it. Further circuits cut is saying, "Why bother? What's the point? Nothing is worth getting involved in." Further circuits amused themselves by analyzing the molecular components of the door and of the humanoid's brain cells. For a quick encore, they measured the level of hydrogen emissions in the surrounding cubic parsec of space and then shut down again in boredom. A spasm of despair shook the robot's body as he turned. "Come on," he droned. "I've been ordered to take you down to the bridge. Here I am, brain the size of a planet, and they asked me to take you down to the bridge. Call that job satisfaction? 'Cause I don't." He turned and walked back to the hated door. "Excuse me," said Ford, following after him. "Which government owns this ship?" Marvin ignored him. "You watch the door," he muttered. "It's about to open again. I can tell by the intolerable air of smugness it suddenly generates." With an ingratiating little whine, the door slid open again, and Marvin stomped through. "Come on," he said. The others followed quickly, and the door slid back into place with pleased little clicks and whirs. "Thank you, the marketing division of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation," said Marvin, and trudged desolately up the gleaming curved corridor which stretched out before them. "Let's build robots with genuine people personalities," they said. So they tried it out with me. I'm a personality prototype. You can tell, can't you? Ford and Arthur muttered embarrassed little disclaimers. "I hate that door," continued Marvin. "I'm not getting you down at all, am I?" "Which government?" started Ford again. No government owns it, snapped the robot. It's been stolen. Damn. Stolen? Stolen? Mimicked Marvin. Who by? Asked Ford. Zaphod Beeblebrox. Something extraordinary happened to Ford's face. At least 5 entirely separate and distinct expressions of shock and amazement piled up on it in a jumbled mess. His left leg, which was in mid-stride, seemed to have difficulty in finding the floor again. He stared at the robot and tried to disentangle some dartoid muscles. Zaphod Beeblebrox, he said weakly. Sorry, did I say something wrong? Said Marvin, dragging himself on regardless. Pardon me for breathing, which I never do anyway, so I don't know why I bothered to say it. Oh God, I'm so depressed. Here's another of those self-sustained doors. Life. Don't talk to me about life. No one even mentioned it, muttered Arthur irritably. Ford, are you all right? Ford stared at him. Did that robot say Zaphod Beeblebrox? He said. So Zaphod Beeblebrox is isn't he an alien? He's like a Zogon, right? There's a whole chapter about him. Let's see. Where was it? Oh, shit. Oh, he was the president. Oh my god, the Imperial Galactic Government. That's actually kind of scary. Alright, and we're back for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, Chapter 12. Previously, the last thing I remember is we were saved by the impossibility drive. Very exciting. Stolen by Zaphod Beeblebrox. Okay. And we're gonna see what happens. He doesn't really care about the stowaways. He's got a little partner. She seems a little cute. I don't know what she looks like. They only described her a little bit. I don't remember. She's kind of funny. I love the robot. He's hilarious. He's like a little Igor, right? Is that his name? The guy from the Winnie the Pooh? The little elephant, Igor, is that his name? The depressed guy? It's like him, but a robot. I'm excited. It's getting interesting now. Let's check it out. Chapter 12. Alright. A loud clatter of gunk music flooded through the Heart of Gold cabin as Zaphod searched the sub-ether radio waves bands for news of himself. The machine was rather difficult to operate. 4 years, radios had been operated by means of pressing buttons and turning dials. Then, as the technology became more sophisticated, the controls were made touch-sensitive. You merely had to brush the panels with your fingers. Now all you had to do was wave your hand in the general direction of the components and hope. It saved a lot of muscular expenditure, of course, but meant that you had to sit infuriatingly still if you wanted to keep listening to the same program. Zaphod waved a hand and the channel switched again. More gunk music, but this time it was a background to a news announcement. The news was always heavily edited to fit the rhythms of the music. And news reports brought to you here on the sub-ether wave band, broadcasting around the galaxy around the clock, squawked the voice. And we'll be saying a big hello to all intelligent life forms everywhere and to everyone else out there. The secret is to bang the rocks together, guys. And of course, the big news story tonight is the sensational theft of the new improbability drive prototype ship by none other than Galactic President Zaphod Beeblebrox. And the question everyone is asking is, has the big Z finally flipped? Beeblebrox, the man who invented the pan-galactic Gargle Blaster, ex-confidence trickster, once described by Eccentrica Galambits as the best bang since the big one, and recently voted the worst dressed sentient being in the known universe for the 7th time. Has he got an answer this time? We asked his private brain care specialist, Gag Halfront. The music swirled and died for a moment. Another voice broke in, presumably Halfront. He said, "Well, Zaphod's just this guy, you know." But got no further because an electric pencil flew across the cabin through the radios on off-sensitive airspace. Zaphod turned and glared at Trillian. She had thrown the pencil. "Hey," he said, "what'd you do that for?" Trillian was tapping her finger on a screen full of figures. "I've just thought of something," she said. "Yeah? Worth interrupting a news bulletin about me for? You hear enough about yourself as it is. I'm very insecure. We know that. Can we drop your ego for a moment? This is important. If there's anything more important than my ego around, I want it caught and shot now." Zaphod glared at her again, then laughed. "Listen," she said. "We picked up those couple of guys." "What couple of guys?" "The couple of guys we picked up." "Oh yeah," said Zaphod. "Those couple of guys. We picked them up in Sector ZZ, plural, Z Alpha." "Yeah?" said Zaphod and blinked. Trillian said quietly, "Does that mean anything to you?" Said Zaphod. "ZZ, plural Z Alpha, ZZ, plural Z Alpha." "Well," said Trillian. What does a Z mean?" said Zaphod. "Which one?" "Anyone." One of the major difficulties Trillian experienced in her relationship with Zaphod was learning to distinguish between him pretending to be stupid just to get people off their guard, pretending to be stupid because he couldn't be bothered to think and wanted someone else to do it for him, pretending to be outrageously stupid to hide the fact that he actually didn't understand what was going on, and really being genuinely stupid. He was renowned for being amazingly clever, and quite clearly was so. But not all the time, which obviously worried him, hence the act. He preferred people to be puzzled rather than contemptuous. This above all appeared to Trillian to be genuinely stupid, but she could no longer be bothered to argue about it. She sighed and punched up a star map on the Vizzy screen, so she could make it simple for him, whatever his reasons for wanting it to be that way. "There," she pointed, "right there." "Hey, yeah," said Zaphod. "Well," she said. "Well, what?" Parts of the middle inside of her head screamed at other parts on the inside of her head. She said very calmly, "It's the same sector you originally picked me up in." He looked at her and then looked back at the screen. "Hey, yeah," he said. "Now that is wild. We should have zapped straight into the middle of the Horse Head Nebula. How did we come to be there? I mean, that's nowhere." She ignored this. "Improbability drive," she said patiently. "You explained it to me yourself. We pass through every point in the universe, you know that." "Yeah, but that's one wild coincidence, isn't it?" "Yes. Picking someone up at that point, out of the whole other universe to choose from, that's just too... I want to work this out." "Computer!" The Sirius Cybernetics shipboard computer, which controlled and permeated every particle of the ship, switched into communication mode. "Hi there," it said brightly, and simultaneously spewed out a tiny ribbon of ticker tape just for the record. The ticker tape said, "Hi there." "Oh God," said Zaphod. He hadn't worked out with this computer for long, but had already learned to loathe it. The computer continued, brash and cheery, as if it were selling detergent. "I want you to know that whatever your problem, I am here to help you solve it." Yeah, said Zaphod. "Look, I think I'll just use a piece of paper." "Sure thing," said the computer, spilling out its message into a waste bin at the same time. "I understand if you ever want..." "Shut up," said Zaphod, and snatching up a pencil, sat down next to Trillian at the console. Okay, said the computer in a hurt tone of voice, and closed down its speech channel again. Zaphod and Trillian pored over the figures that the improbability flight path scanner flashed silently up in front of them. "Can we work out?" said Zaphod. From this point of view, what the improbability of their rescue was? Yes, that's a constant, said Trillian. 2 to the power of 276,790 to 1 against. That's high. They're two lucky guys. Yes, but relative to what we were doing when the ship picked them up, Trillium punched up the figures. They showed 2 to the power of infinity minus 1 to 1 against. An irrational number that only has a conventional meaning in probability physics. It's pretty low, continued Zaphod, with a slight whistle. Yes, agreed Trillian, and looked at him quizzically. That's one big whack of improbability to be accounted for. Something pretty improbable has got to show up on the balance sheet if it's all going to add up into a pretty sum. Zaphod scribbled a few psalms, crossed them out, and threw the pencil away. Bats those. I can't work it out. Well? Zaphod knocked his two heads together in irritation and gritted his teeth. Okay, he said. Computer! The voice circuit sprang up to life again. Why, hello there, they said. Ticker tape, ticker tape. All I want to do is make your day nicer and nicer and nicer. Yeah, well, shut up and work something out for me. Sure thing, chattered the computer. You want a probability forecast based on improbability data, yeah. Okay, the computer continued. Here's an interesting little notion. Did you realize that most people's lives are governed by telephone numbers? A pained look crawled across Zaphod's face and onto the other one. Have you flipped? He said. No, but you will when I tell you that, Trillian gasped. She scrabbled at the buttons on the improbability flight path screen. Telephone number? She said. Did that thing say telephone number? Numbers flashed up on the screen. The computer had paused politely, but now it continued. What I was about to say was that... Don't bother, please, said Trillian. Look, what is this, said Zaphod. I don't know, said Trillian, but those aliens, they're on the way up to the bridge with that wretched robot. Can we pick them up on any monitor cameras? I'm not sure why that's a big deal. I know that Trillian just spoke to our main characters in the previous chapter. I don't remember if she said you have to stay here or if she said you could roam around. Did she say anything about that? I'm going to continue. I'm not going to look for it, but... What was that chapter about? Let me see. Oh, they're discussing how improbable it is. And the one before that, it was how the ship was stolen. Okay. Chapter 13. Marvin trudged down on the corridor, still moaning. And then, of course, I've got this terrible pain in all the dials down my left side. No, said Arthur grimly as he walked alongside him. Really? Oh, yes, said Marvin. I mean, I've asked for them to be replaced, but no one ever listens. I can imagine. Vague whistling and humming noises were coming from Ford. Well, he kept saying to himself. Zaphod Beeblebrox. Suddenly Marvin stopped and held up a hand. You know what's happened now, of course. No, what? Said Arthur, who didn't want to know. Oh. We've arrived at another of one of those doors. There was a sliding door led inside the side of the corridor. Marvin eyed it suspiciously. Well, said Ford impatiently, do we go through? Do we go through? Mimicked Marvin. Yes, this is the entrance to the bridge. I was told to take you to the bridge. Probably the highest demand that will be made on my intellectual capacities today. I shouldn't wander. Slowly, with great loathing, he stepped toward the door like a hunter stalking his prey. Suddenly, it slid open. Thank you, it said, for making a simple door very happy. Deep in Marvin's thorax, gears ground. Funny, he intoned funerally. How just when you think life can't possibly get any worse, it suddenly does. He heaved himself through the door and left Ford and Arthur staring at each other and shrugging their shoulders. From inside they heard Marvin's voice again. I suppose you'll want to see the aliens now, he said. Do you want me to sit in a corner and rust or just fall apart where I'm standing? Yeah, just show them in, would you, Marvin? Came another voice. Arthur looked at Ford and was astonished to see him laughing. "What's—" "Shh," said Ford. "Come on in." He stepped through into the bridge. Arthur followed him in nervously and was astonished to see a man lolling back in a chair with his feet on a control console, picking the teeth in his right hand, in his right head, with his left hand. Right hand head. What? What did that say? With his feet on a control console, picking the teeth in his right hand. Head. With his left hand? He has a head on his right hand for some reason? The right hand head seemed to be thoroughly preoccupied with this task, but the left hand one was grinning a broad, relaxed, nonchalant grin. The number of things that Arthur couldn't believe he was seeing was fairly large. His jaw flopped about at a loose end for a while. The peculiar man waved a lazy wave at Ford, and with an appalling affection, all nonchalant, said, "Ford, hi, how are you? Glad you dropped in." Ford was not going to be outcooled. "Zaphod," he drawled. "Great to see you. You're looking well. The extra arm suits you. Nice ship you stolen." Arthur goggled at him. "You mean you know this guy?" he said, waving a wild finger at Zaphod. "Know him?" exclaimed Ford. He paused and decided to do the introductions the other way around. "Oh, Zaphod, this is a friend of mine, Arthur Dent," he said. "I saved him when his planet blew up." "Oh, sure," said Zaphod. "Hi, Arthur. Glad you could make it." His right-hand head looked around casually, said hi, and went back to having its teeth picked. Ford carried on. "And Arthur," he said, "this is my semi-cousin Zaphod Beebe." "We've met," said Arthur sharply. "When you're cruising down the road in the fast lane and you lazily sail past a few hard-driving cars and are feeling pretty pleased with yourself, and then accidentally change down from fourth to first instead of third, thus making your engine leap out of your hood in a rather ugly mess, it tends to throw you off your stride in much the same way that this remark threw Ford Prefect off his. What?" he said. "I said we've met." Zaphod gave an awkward start of surprise and jabbed a gum sharply. "Hey, have we... Hey, Ford rounded on Arthur with an angry flash in his eyes. Now he felt he was back on home ground. He suddenly began to resent having lumbered himself with this ignorant primitive who knew as much about the affairs of the galaxy as an Ilford-based gnat knew about life in Peking. "What do you mean you've met?" he demanded. "This is Zaphod Beetlebrox from Beetlejuice 5. You know, not bloody Martin Smith from Croydon." "I don't care," said Arthur coldly. "We've met, haven't we, Zaphod Beetlebrox, or should I say, Phil?" "What?" shouted Ford. "You'll have to remind me," said Zaphod. I've a terrible memory for species." "It was at a party," pursued Arthur. "Yeah, well, I doubt that," said Zaphod. "Cool it, will you, Arthur?" demanded Ford. Arthur could not be deterred. "A party 6 months ago, on Earth, England." Zaphod shook his head with a tight-lipped smile. "London," insisted Arthur. "Islington." "Oh," said Zaphod with a guilty start. "That party." This wasn't fair on Ford at all. He looked backward and forward between Arthur and Zaphod. "What?" he said to Zaphod. "You don't mean to say you've been on that miserable little planet as well, do you?" "No, of course not," said Zaphod breezily. "Well, I may have just dropped in briefly, on my way somewhere. But I was stuck there for 15 years. Well, I didn't know that, did I? But what were you doing there? Looking about, He gate-crashed at a party," said Arthur, trembling with anger. "A fancy dress party." "It would have to be, wouldn't it?" said Ford. "At this party," persisted Arthur, "was a girl." "Oh, well, look, it doesn't matter now. The whole place has gone up in smoke anyway." "I wish you'd stop sulking about that bloody planet," said Ford. "Who was the lady?" "Oh, just somebody." "Well, all right. I wasn't doing very well with her. I just been trying all evening. Hell, she was something, though. Beautiful, charming, devastatingly intelligent. At last I got her to myself for a bit, and this was playing her with a bit of talk when this friend of yours barges up and says, 'Hey, doll, is this guy boring you? Why don't you talk to me instead? I'm from a different planet. I never saw her again." "Zaphod?" exclaimed Arford. "Yes," said Arthur, glaring at him and trying not to feel foolish. He only had the 2 arms and the 1 head, and he called himself Phil. But you must admit, he did not turn out to be from another planet," said Trillian, wandering into sight at the other end of the bridge. She gave Arthur a pleasant smile which settled on him like a ton of bricks, and then turned her attention to the ship's controls again. There was silence for a few seconds, and then out of the scrambled mess of Arthur's brain crawled some words. "Tricia Macmillan," he said. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you," she said. "I hitched a lift, after all, with a degree in math and another in astrophysics. What else was there to do? It was either that or the dole Qun again on Monday." "Infinity minus 1, chattered the computer. "Improbability sum now complete." Zaffa looked about him, at Ford, at Arthur, and then at Trillian. "Trillian," he said, "is this sort of thing going to happen every time we use the improbability drive?" "Very probably, I'm afraid," she said. That's funny. I have a cat with me. Her name is Moondust, and she's a tuxedo. Maybe I'll show her in a future video. She came to disturb our reading session, and now I'm distracted. I love my kitty. All right. Interesting. So they know each other. It's pretty funny. Douglas Adams, he's world building. At the same time, he's introducing characters. The story is not bad. It's good. He's hitting all the plot. I mean, it looks like we're following. It looks like the main character is Arthur, and we're following a character who lost his home. And what he does, and the choices he makes after he loses that home. What a man has to do after he lost everything. How do you start anew? Even though, I mean, he technically has what's his name? Ford Prefect. He technically has Ford Prefect around him, so I can't believe that the president fucking stole a state-of-the-art machine like that. It's pretty crazy. I wonder why. He probably doesn't like how the government's running, to be honest. Alright, guys, we'll move on. I'm not dying of laughter, by the way. I heard every line is supposed to be a joke. Maybe I'm too old. I'm chuckling. But if the book doesn't make me laugh, of course it's not a bad book. So, let's continue.